Okay, so in my head, these were grabby hands, but I see my error. Look, all I'm saying is just put the books here, okay? Just give me the books and nobody gets hurt. Well, theoretically, because quite a few of these authors love to hurt people. In their souls. I'm not crowdfunding for bail money or anything. Look, I like what I like, okay? Let's just roll the footage. It's Liane and welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to talk about one of my favourite topics, me. Or specifically, the things that I like. Things in this case being authors. Today we are going to talk about 10 authors that could pretty much get me to buy anything that they wrote, even if it was, you know, just their name on the back of their shopping receipt. But as you can tell from the title, these authors are not just authors whose work I am obsessed with, who I will collect throughout time. These are authors who, as soon as they bring out a new book, I pre-order it, I have it, I'm in line. I am there when the bookshop opens saying, please, can I have it now, thank you. So without further ado, let's get started with this list of people who I will give all of my money to as long as they just give me more words. I have tried to include some fairly obvious authors on here and also some surprises, so let me know how you do with your Liane Gotcha bingo card down in the comments. Oh, and by the way, this list is in no particular order because ranking things gives me ADHD anxiety and we're not going there today, okay? First up on this list, let's go with one that I think will probably be an obvious, easy gotcha for anybody who has watched my channel for any amount of time, and that is Lisa Jewell. Lisa Jewell is primarily a thriller author with the bulk of her work focusing on that, although if you do go far enough back in her backlist you will find some things that lean more towards mysteries, and then right back in the hazy beginnings of her publishing days there are some like contemporary slice of life things. She is also fairly prolific in that today I believe she has 19 separate novels available, which girl, I cannot reliably get myself dressed 19 days in a row, let alone write 19 novels. This little stack on my bookshelves here, hiding out behind my poisoned apple bookmark mug, that was an unnecessary mouthful, are all Lisa Jewell books. And there are some like up here and like at the very end here. You'd think I would be better with the pointy thing after like 7 years on BookTube, but apparently not. I first discovered Lisa Jewell through The Family Upstairs, which was a 5-star instant hit with me. I read it in like one sitting, it was amazing. And also she's bringing out a sequel to this very soon, which expect not to see me that week. That's all I'll be doing. Trends in publishing can be a little bit weird, especially in the thriller genres, because what publishers tend to do is see a book that has done very well and then they buy 15 more books that do the exact same thing, and then people find that they're picking up the same kind of style of book again and again and they get bored. And unfortunately that is not just a genre-wide thing, some thriller authors also fall into that trap with subsequent releases of their books. So when I discovered Lisa Jewell originally I was scared, but I need not have been. Although all of her books do include similar themes which I enjoy, none of the twists or hooks are anything like the other. If you would like to start with Lisa Jewell, I really do suggest that you start where I did with The Family Upstairs, because I feel like it really kind of epitomises her style and gives you a good taste of what she's capable of. So next up, one that you guys maybe weren't expecting from me is a fantasy author, and that is Maureen Brennan. I first discovered Maureen Brennan's work when her book A Natural History of Dragons was published, and I then subsequently religiously followed each release in the series and read them aloud to lovely spouse Harry. We adore this series, it's just so good. When I have recommended Maureen Brennan's books in the past, I have always said that I felt that her books were a perfect bridge for people who wanted to get into fantasy but mostly read classics, modern classics and literary fiction. They're kind of exactly like Jane Austen with dragons and an extra boost of feminism. There's such a ton of character development in them and you get really deeply invested in everybody, especially the side characters, because although you know that the series is the memoirs of Lady Trent and so you're getting things from Lady Trent's point of view, it's really about how everybody in Lady Trent's life has come together to help her realise her dream. And how this weird dream that she has to become the first dragon anthropologist also changes the lives of everybody around her because she teaches them what freedom can look like. But she has now started to co-author another series under the combined name M.A. Carrick, starting with Mask of Mirrors. Mask of Mirrors actually got picked for my Patreon book club for March and April, and I was a little bit scared because I had only read the Lady Trent books and I was really worried that this one wasn't going to live up to it. I needn't have worried because I am obsessed. There's still a lot of society politics in there, but there's a lot more to grapple with. The themes are a lot more violent and in your face. There's definitely a lot more adult content, shall we say, than there are in the Lady Trent books, although they are adult fantasy novels. I think it is safe to say that in my near future I will be purchasing the next book in the Mask of Mirrors series and auto-buying everything that Marie Brennan writes henceforth. Next up on my list is an author that I think you guys will absolutely already know is on this list, and that is Theodora Goss. I know you're not going to be surprised about this if you've been here for more than 5 minutes, because the Athena Club series is one of my favourite series in the entire freaking world, and I am permanently heartbroken that it is but a trilogy. And I am even more heartbroken that Theodora Goss doesn't actually have any other backlist as far as I am aware other than this trilogy. I don't know what to do with myself. I need more books now. But I am hopeful because the last one in this series came out a couple of years ago, and I know that Theodora Goss has actually been moving country. She has been moving from the US to Budapest, where she is setting up a little writing nest as we speak, and so I am hoping that that means that in the foreseeable future we will get an announcement of a new book. Theodora, my friend, I'm looking at you. The Athena Club series is essentially a retelling of some of your favourite gothic horror novels. We follow Mary Jekyll as she is left absolutely destitute when her mother dies. She has to go home to her rambling Victorian house, pay off her servants, and try and wonder how she is going to exist in society with absolutely no income whatsoever. The possible solution for this comes in a very strange way as she is looking through some of her father's papers and discovers that the man who killed him, Mr. Hyde, his terrible associate, is still at large, and there is still quite a substantial reward on his head. So she decides to go headhunting. But as she carries on her journey, she starts to discover some other girls who are just like her. Girls who have been born from or created by monstrous fathers and have been abandoned in the world to fend for themselves. And together they create the Athena Club. Theodora Goss is just so high on my auto-buy list. I need another book. Please get me out of another book. Next up on my list, we're staying in Horror Town, and this time we're talking about T. Kingfisher, otherwise known as Ursula Vernon. I discovered T. Kingfisher at the end of last year, I think, when I read The Twisted Ones and became a devotee at the foot of her altar. I read a lot of horror books, like a real lot of horror books, guys. And I am very seldom genuinely scared by what I read. And I say that as somebody who doesn't really read a lot of like slasher or body horror, but somebody who reads much more supernatural horror, where you should be frightened because there are supernatural forces that you don't understand, and there are, you know, ghosts and houses that do weird things, but I'm not often scared. The Twisted Ones genuinely kept me up at night. I was genuinely freaked out. I honestly slept with the light on, and it was fabulous. This also became known for everybody on my channel at the time as the book where the dog doesn't die. I try my very best whenever I talk about books to you guys to not give you anything in the way of significant spoilers. But when it comes to this book, I could not do that, because the big selling point of this book, where we follow Mouse to the woods where she is cleaning out her dead grandma's house for her dad, who is physically incapable of doing it himself, and discovers that her grandma's house is one huge hoard in the middle of the woods with just rooms and rooms of stacked stuff. she is also doing it with her dog as her companion. And her dog is legitimately as much of a character as Mouse is in this book. We honestly follow him as much as we do her. T. Kingfisher writes a kind of brand of speculative horror that I haven't really read anywhere else. She incorporates quite classic themes and the things that make us really to our soul quite creeped out, and she does completely new takes on them. And all of her characters are punishingly relatable. I felt so connected to Mouse, it was insane, and she is so funny. All of T. Kingfisher's characters are hilarious. Some of them are subtle and sarcastic, and some of them are just laugh out loud funny, and I find it such a good way to break the tension in a horror novel. I feel like sometimes horror authors are afraid to make you laugh in a book because they want to maintain the atmosphere, but just T. Kingfisher proves that you can do both things at the same time. Again, if you want to start anywhere with T. Kingfisher, I would say The Twisted Ones is a perfect example of everything that she does, but then you can follow on to The Hollow Places, which wins the award for possibly the most stunning cover that I've seen in the last couple of years. Next up, in another, I am sure, whose surprised moment, we have got Jane Harper. Jane Harper is a thriller author who writes both an ongoing series and standalones, which makes me very happy, because although I love following along with series, sometimes I just want all of the amazing things from one author in a standalone that I can just read and then go back to the other 24 series that I am still in the middle of. And I also think that there aren't a lot of series out there that I would actually call true thriller series. There are a lot of mystery series, there are a lot of like cozy crime series, but I don't feel like there are very many thriller series. The Dry follows Aaron Falk, who is actually a fraud detective, and he is not on the job in any way when he goes back to the small town that he left very, very many years ago for a funeral of a friend of his who has apparently committed a murder-suicide and taken his entire family with him. The whole town is left just dizzied and in shock. He's not the type of person who they would have believed who would have done this. And some of his family members approach Aaron and ask him if he could please look into the case. They don't feel like law enforcement are taking this seriously. They want someone who actually originates from the town and who cares about the people in the town to look into this case. And as you can probably tell from that synopsis, The Dry includes a lot of things that I really love in my thrillers, tropes that I come back to again and again. There is of course somebody coming back to a small town, which is a theme throughout all of Jane Harper's books. Somebody returning to a past that they have like shed like a second skin and then are forced to go back and confront. There are more complicated family relationships with lots of hidden secrets. In The Dry it is Aaron and his father. In The Lost Man, which is my favourite of her standalones ever and one of my favourite thrillers in the world, definitely top 3 tier favourite thrillers right here. It's the main character and his brother's very young family who are left behind. But as with all Australian fiction, there is a kind of atmosphere that I just can't really quantify or put into words with Jane Harper's fiction. It's this constant feeling of like vague something at the back of your neck stress, where you just know that more things are going on than you can see, and that if you don't find out what they are, bad things are going to happen, but getting to those things is not going to be easy. And it's also this haunting landscape thing that she does. In every one of Jane Harper's books we visit a different Australian locale. So we're in the deep bush, we're out in the absolute wilderness, one of them is set by the coast, and each of these different places bring their own kind of violence and foreboding with them, and they're just so freaking good. I cannot emphasize enough to you that if I were ever to put together a top 10 of my favourite books in the world, my desert island books, the only books that I would ever be able to read again, that The Lost Man would definitely be on there. And starting with Jane Harper is a fairly easy choice. If you want to start with a series and get invested, then start with The Dry, and if you want to start with a standalone, then there is The Lost Man. I mean, there's also The Survivors, but there's The Lost Man. Just read the freaking book, okay? Next up, swinging back to fantasy for the most part, I guess, we have Samantha Shannon. I don't even really know where to start with Samantha Shannon except to say that she now has an entire shelf. This whole shelf on my bookcase is the Samantha Shannon shelf. And there are very few authors in this library who have an entire shelf to themselves because shelf space is what? Limited. I was introduced to Samantha Shannon last year by the lovely Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction, who gifted me The Bone Season because it is her favourite book in the world of all time and she will just not stop talking about it. And I can be quite trepidatious when somebody tells me that it's their favourite book, which is ironic because I sit here and tell you about all of my favourite books and want you to read them right now. But I think there's like an added level of pressure where you have a good friend and they're like, this is my favourite book, and if you don't like it then it's like a personal affront, an attack on your relationship and your love. Whereas like if you guys don't like a book that I love, then you don't even have to tell me about it. Although you can tell me about it because I like opinions here. Anyway, all this to say, I went into the Bone Season not sure what I was going to get. It's because Samantha Shannon does one thing for absolute sure, and that is gigantic world building. And both the Bone Season series, which we'll get into a bit more in a second, and also the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is an epic fantasy, which is also epic in length. It's a chunker. I could use it comfortably for a doorstop or a car jack to change my tyre. She creates these huge complex world with layers and layers of politics and backstory and magical powers, or in the Bone Season I guess supernatural powers, but you get my drift. And everything in these worlds just seems absolutely seamless. And for me, both in like urban fantasy and also fantasy, world building is one of the things that I show up for. I need characters, I need a believable magic system, but I also need world building. Those are it. Those are my three absolute musts and I'm in. And Samantha Shannon just knocked so many other bitches out the way and said, I do this better. Bone Season is one of those kind of genre-defying series that is really difficult to sum up. Samantha Shannon herself calls it sci-fi on an epic fantasy scale, and I definitely think it is that, but I definitely also think it has like one foot in urban fantasy and one foot in like supernatural romance, and all of these things come together to make a beautiful package about ghosts and clairvoyance and kind of like an underground speakeasy culture, which I love. I have never walked into a series and been so completely captivated with the overload of information that I am given at the start as I am with the Bone Season. There is a lot of stuff to get your head around, and for some people that can seem really intimidating, but I love it. I love layers and layers of detail. I love when there's a term for everything. I love me a glossary in a fantasy novel. You give me the detail. The Bone Season definitely serves when it comes to that. But the other thing that I really love about Samantha Shannon is that she doesn't write traditionally likeable characters. Although you do like her characters and you do root for them and you do feel for them and have emotions, they are not typically warm and fuzzy characters. You're not going, oh, woe is them, the world is difficult, I want to have them have better things for themselves. You're like, holy crap, that was a morally questionable decision that you just made. I am very there for it, please continue. And if all of that wasn't enough for you, there's also a huge amount of relationship diversity in here and queerness and just joy. There's just so much joy. Samantha Shannon is an author who could write a short story on the back of a napkin and I would bid for it. I'd probably not win it because there are some really rabid Samantha Shannon fans out there and I'm poor, but I would bid for it. Very much on my auto-buy list. Next up, one that I don't think you guys are going to expect, and a kind of interesting one for this list. The next author that I have is Nancy Tucker. Now you will probably recognise Nancy Tucker's name if you watched my tops and bottoms for March, because I read this book, which is The First Day of Spring, which is her first ever thriller novel for that wrap up, and I loved it quite a lot. But Nancy is not in fact a new author, although this is her first fiction book. Nancy is in fact an author that I have followed through her whole career up to date, and I am just so thankful that I found her. Nancy's first published book was The Time in Between, which is actually her memoir of her recovery journey from anorexia and bulimia. But the thing that really caught me about this memoir was not only how raw and how honest Nancy was, what actually caught me was the quality of Nancy's prose. I was captivated by the way that Nancy wrote, about the way that she would turn a phrase to make you think about a piece of information about these illnesses as something that you hadn't ever seen before. She would articulate things in a way that I had never even thought about. I still recommend it all the time to anybody who has an interest in these areas. But then Nancy published this book, which is, this is when they started to worry. You will be able to tell the title. For some reason, this title just never sticks in my brain. But this was then published when Nancy was in university and she was studying psychology, and she realised that there were so many women that she had encountered who really had been let down by the mental health services. Nancy interviewed a bunch of women who had had this experience, and this book is her conclusions and their interviews and their stories, and it's beautiful but also deeply enraging. It's beautiful, but it is deeply enraging. But this book popped up in my Patreon picks pot, which is a pot that my patrons are allowed to throw any book title they like into, and I pick one at random every month to read. And I was like, wait, you're kidding, is this the same person? And it is. And this thriller is A, one of the best books that I have read this year, but B, one of the best thrillers that I have ever read. And it is entirely influenced by Nancy's experience of working in psychology and social work as a student, and I just love that for her. I love the progression of her career that you can see through her books. It's amazing. I'm not going to talk too much about this one or all of the things that Nancy does in it and the atmosphere in it, because you can go and just watch my March wrap up and get a much more in-depth slice of this. But anything Nancy writes, anything. Okay, many down, 3 to go. The next one on my list is absolutely one that you guys already know. I'll give you some clues. Tell me in the comments how long it took you to guess. She is a fantasy author that I have loved for many years. Her works are some of the longest books that I have read in my entire life. She takes up an entire shelf, not just a cube, but an entire shelf in my library, and I would probably give her another 2 shelves if she would just keep writing these books. And her stuff is filled with exactly the kind of fantasy magic that I like, stuff that comes spontaneously from nature and doesn't need lots of magic spells. Did you guess? Did you digit? Of course I am talking about Robin Hobb. Here's the shelf, just in case you hadn't guessed. It does have some like Juliet Morelli chilling on top of it because I don't have anywhere to put her right now. But just deal with it, okay? Robin Hobb, of course, writes the Realm of the Elderlings series, which is one of the longest, most prolific and most beloved fantasy series here on BookTube, and in fact anywhere else in the fantasy world. I think that if you are a fantasy lover and you haven't read a Robin Hobb book, you've definitely been living under a rock. As I've said before in this video, the fantasy that I adore has to have rich world building, and nobody is better at it than Robin Hobb. But the thing that I and anybody else in your life who has read a Robin Hobb book will tell you, the number one thing that we keep coming back for again and again is the character development. Often in Robin Hobb books you are following characters from when they're very young through the course of their entire lives. And oh man, it is hard not to get hooked on those people. There are some characters in Robin Hobb's books that I will just absolutely go to the mat for. Birch, the Fool, Brashen, ugh. They are such full and complete people that when I open up Robin Hobb's fantasy books, I feel like I am coming back to Friends. I constantly want to reread the first 2 books in this series. I kept getting stuck in a loop of them for years, but I'm finally now hip deep in an actual reread of the whole thing so I can get to the last trilogy that I have not yet read. I am dreading and have been putting off for such a long time. I'm scared. What happens when they finish? Next up on this list we have the absolute wonder that is Maureen Johnson, or more specifically the truly devious series by Maureen Johnson and anything else that she writes that's a thriller after it. Okay, that's gonna need a little bit of explaining, isn't it? Yeah. Maureen Johnson is a YA author and she has a very diverse backlist. So when I say thrillers, I mean I started with the Truly Devious series, which is an absolute love letter to true crime, to classic mysteries like Miss Marple. Maureen Johnson is herself a massive Agatha Christie fan. She absolutely is devoted to Miss Marple and it shows in all of her writing. She actually co-authored one of my favourite little coffee table books, which is A Guide to Not Getting Murdered in a Quaint English Village, which is in itself an absolute passion project, which looks at things like Poirot and Marple, and more recently things like Midsummer Murders. And although the Truly Devious series follows Stevie Bell, who is an American teenager going to a very elite but very strange academy on the basis that she is going to solve the ancient kidnap and murder case that happened there, there are still so many nods to Agatha Christie that it was impossible that I wasn't going to love this series. But before she wrote the Truly Devious series, she wrote the Shades of London series, which is my next foray into her as soon as I am finished my reread of Truly Devious so that I can finally get to the last book. But she has also written a few YA contemporaries like 13 Blue Envelopes, and I don't think that I will be going back and exploring those. So when I say that Maureen Johnson is an auto-buy author, I mean that I am going to buy anything that she publishes now, anything new, anything after the Truly Devious series. It's gonna be mine. And then finally, the last author on this list is taking a trip back to Sci-Fi Town, and it is, of course, the one and only Becky Chambers. Even if you do not like sci-fi, I am absolutely sure that you have heard of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and the series that came after it. There's no way that you can exist on BookTube without having heard about the Wayfarers series in some capacity. The Long Way to the Small Angry Planet is one of my favourite books in the entire world, and as soon as I read it I became a devotee of Becky Chambers. It doesn't matter what she writes, it doesn't matter if she continues to write sci-fi or if she goes off and writes some other really random thing. I would like her to try fantasy. I would like it if she would write a straight up fantasy novel. That would be great. But anyway, whatever genre she goes to next, I will be following her. Long Way to the Small Angry Planet dealt with a cast of characters on a tunnelling ship which essentially punched holes through space to make wormholes so that you could get from one end of the galaxy to the other a lot quicker, which is a dangerous and lonely profession. But all of the people on this ship were on this ship because they didn't want to deal with anybody else. They didn't want to deal with humanity or their families or any shady thing that might have happened in their backstory, and so they become this little found family on the ship, and it's a lot less about the plot of what actually happens to them while this is going on and a lot more about the characters. It is the queerest and most diverse cast that I have ever seen, and I love it so freaking much. And even though I think everybody else who has read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is disappointed that she didn't write any more books just specifically about those characters in the series itself is still so rich. It still goes so many other places in the universe. There are still more characters to fall in love with. Suffice it to say that any other thing that she writes in the future will be in my future. She already has about, you know, a third of a shelf to herself. I'd be happy to make it. I would be delighted to make it an entire cube. Becky, I'll give you the whole cube if you just keep writing. So that's it guys, that was my list of auto-buy authors, and at least the very cream of the top of all of the reasons why I love them. They are also by no means my only auto-buy authors. I do have a few more, so if you would like another list of these at some point in the future, let me know that down in the comments. Do you pick any of these authors up completely blind, or are you going to try any of these authors? Because I am so passionately and madly in love with them. Tell me all of those things down below, and remember, if you would like to join in our Patreon book club and read one of the books from one of these authors, the link to that is down below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It really does help to support my channel, and if you are new here, hit subscribe and stay around for more lists of wholesome goodness in the future. And I will speak to you soon guys. Bye! Why do you only start eating food when I'm filming videos? Can you not eat at any other time of the day?